Blade Vortex BV, the build of builds. Our zoomy boomy savior was nerfed into the ground in patch 3.14. GGG was tired of its immense popularity league after league, its casual friendly playstyle, and its relatively low investment requirement. And so, along with the release of Ultimatum League, they absolutely gutted virtually every meaningful aspect of the spell. They took away its duration. They took away its damage. They even took away its precious AoE. Each nerf acted as a less multiplier on its effectiveness, leaving BV disciples with an insurmountable deficit to make it playable again. BV was dead, bludgeoned beyond recognition by the nerf bat, and only the hate-fueled Redditors were rejoicing. All hope seemed lost, and for a time it was. But then, a new patch came and hearkened of BV's return, and in 3.17, Blade Vortex returned stronger than ever before. Hey Exiles, Chronic Painless here with my League Start Guide for Blade Vortex in patch 3.17. This is going to be a guide for an Elementalist and an Occultist version of the build, and we'll talk about the differences between those in a little bit. But first, I want to go over what I feel is the most important thing for making just about any Blade Vortex build feel good in the current patch. So, what the hell am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about these two numbers right here. Your skill duration of Blade Vortex and the time that it takes you to generate your maximum seals on Unleash. Now, don't worry, the nerf to Unleash has no effect on Blade Vortex as it does not inherit the less damage multiplier. So no sweat there. We're still going to be running Unleash and still going to be getting that 50% more damage buff from the changes in 3.17. Skill duration seal generation ratio that you are aiming for is 2. You want this number to be bigger than 2. When you divide your skill duration by your seal generation, right? You want it to be twice as big, at least. Why do we want it that way? Because Blade Vortex with 4 maximum seals will generate 5 blades. Blade Vortex has a maximum of 10 blades, but we need 2 casts to generate 10 blades. That means we need to cast twice during our duration at our maximum seals. So you can see this is the way we get to the ratio of 2 to 1. We need our skill duration to be twice as long as our maximum seal generation time. If there's one thing you're going to take away from this entire video, I do sincerely hope it's that. The next thing I want to talk about is what the two builds have in common. First off, they're both going to be leveling with Stormblast Mines. Stormblast Mines is a classic leveling ability that's been really strong for several patches and is still going to be great in 3.17. And so I'm going to be using that all the way up to Act 6 on both the Elementalist and the Occultist. At that point, both builds will switch over to Blade Vortex with full cold conversion and make use of the Hypothermia, Cold Penetration, and of course Unleash support gems in order to start doing our damage with Blade Vortex. The next thing that both of these builds have in common is that they both want to be running Veilblade Vortex. Veilblade Vortex is extremely important for 2 primary reasons. The first is that it gives a large damage boost on bosses thanks to the 2 charges, and the second is that it gives us an option to do damage from range. This is extremely helpful against enemies like porcupines that explode on death, or against particularly strong enemies such as Beyond bosses or the new rares from the Archnemesis League. It's a lot easier when you can just get your big brother to go beat up the bully than it is to do it yourself, and Veilblade Vortex will be your big brother protecting you when you run this build. Another important similarity between the two builds is that they will both be making use of the Blast Freeze cluster notable. The utility of this notable for the builds cannot be overstated as it provides both offense and defense. It provides offense in the form of chaining your Herald of Ice explosions and defense in the form of freezing enemies before they can kill you. I've said it many times on my stream, the best defense is a good freeze fence. While both of these builds are relatively glassy cannons, the ability to freeze your enemies and kill them before they can damage you is extremely powerful all the way up through endgame bosses. Lastly, I just want to quickly touch on some more similarities before we get into the differences. First, both builds are going to be running the Vortex Bone Chill combination for a significant damage boost based on the chilling effect of the Vortex. We're going to put this on our left click and run Arcane Surge to have a reliable source of that buff in addition to the damage from the Bone Chill. Next, both builds are going to be making use of Hrim Sorrows for 50% cold conversion, as well as the Cold Mastery for 40% cold conversion, and this 90% is going to be more than enough to get us started at the beginning of the league. Lastly, Elemental Overload is a keystone that both builds will be using for a significant portion of time until they're able to invest heavily in critical strikes. This is a very valuable keystone that's going to boost your damage significantly, but eventually both builds will want to go into a crit-based build. Now that we've talked about the similarities, let's go over the primary difference between the Elementalist and the Occultist versions of the build. If I had to summarize it, I would say that if your goal for the league is to make a high-level character, clear the endgame bosses, but then be more or less done with the league, the Elementalist is going to be the way for you. However, if you want to invest a substantial amount of time and currency into min-maxing your build, Occultist is going to give a lot more benefit from such investment. The reason for this disparity is the foundations of the two builds. Whereas the Elementalist relies on its golems, the Occultist is going to be stacking power charges. Golems are very strong in the early part of the league because their effectiveness only requires ascendancies and high skill gem levels, whereas the Occultist is going to benefit a lot more from heavy item investment and higher levels on the passive tree. Now, let's expand on that while we look at some gameplay. First, I'd like to talk some more about the Elementalist. As we mentioned, the Elementalist has its foundation in its golems. Golems are going to provide a bunch of tangible benefits like life regen and physical damage reduction, but also provide intangible benefits in the form of tanking projectiles and taunting enemies. All of these combined make it a much more casual-friendly playstyle that is less of a glass cannon than its Occultist counterpart. Another important difference is that the Elementalist is going to be making use of the Heraldry cluster notable. The reason we use this on the Elementalist is that they have the Mastermind of Discord Ascendancy. This Ascendancy plus Heraldry means that all nearby enemies will have a substantial penalty to their resistances. By comparison, the Occultist does not benefit as much from having reliable exposure, and so we will use Frostbomb to provide exposure on bosses, but not be using it for our general clear speed. One last little thing that separates the Elementalist from the Occultist is the source of Culling Strike. On the Elementalist, we're going to attach Culling Strike support to at least 3 of our golems in order to enable that very beneficial mechanic. Now, let's talk about the Occultist. Of course, the most important thing to discuss with respect to the Occultist is power charges. Power charges are the foundation of the build, providing damage and AoE that scales all the way into the super min-maxed version of the build. However, there is a caveat that investing too heavily in power charges, particularly from the passive tree, too soon will not be as efficient as some other nodes. The reason for this is that without void batteries, we're lacking an important source of power charge scaling, and so before that point in the league, it's best to just invest in the other parts of the tree and perhaps anoint a power charge node at most. The next fundamental piece of the Occultist build is the Profane Bloom Ascendancy. This is one of the most powerful ascendancies in the entire game in terms of improving your clear speed. However, as with power charges, there is a danger of investing in it too soon. The key to unlocking the biggest potential benefits from Profane Bloom is getting a source of curse on hit. Other sources of curse application will never chain as well as curse on hit when it comes to Profane Bloom. I like to go for a Redeemer Ring with Frostbite via a Harvest Caster Reforge, or corrupting my Hrim Sorrows to try to get Elemental Weakness on hit. Either of these sources will enable your Profane Bloom to chain explosions so that the more juiced your map is, the faster you will clear it. Finally, as with the Elementalist, we want to have a source of Culling Strike for our Occultist. However, lacking golems, we need to find another way to benefit from this mechanic. I've found that the simplest way to get Culling Strike in the early part of a league as an occultist is to make use of cremation. Thanks to the substantial skill duration that we get from the tree, cremation will last a very long time, and if we attach an unleash support to the cremation, we will be creating a massive barrage of projectiles, constantly trying to apply a Culling Strike effect to the boss, thereby culling it as soon as it reaches 10%. This is absolutely crucial to get the most out of Culling Strike, as if you're not culling the boss as soon as they're at 10%, then you're not getting the true damage boost of Culling Strike. Well, that covers just about everything that I wanted to touch on in this video. Of course, I could keep talking about either of these builds for hours and hours, discussing the intricacies of each and the various decisions that went into them, and I'd actually be happy to do so on my stream, twitch.tv/chronic_painless. So do stop by if you have any questions or just want to say hey. I'm going to be on a lot, especially at the beginning of this league, as I'm extremely excited for the buffs that Blade Vortex got, and I'm going to try to make a push towards the top of the ladder, so it should be a lot of fun. And as always, stay painless.